Islamic upbringing and adherence to Islamic norms contribute to the development of a mental disorder known as sociopathy, the active form of which poses an increased danger to society. This conclusion has been reached by Chinese and Western experts studying the problems of Islamic radicalism and Muslim crime. The starting point for this study was the sharp escalation of ethnic and religious tensions between Uyghur Muslims living in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region and the Chinese government between 1990 and 2015. Muslim radicals launched an armed uprising and carried out hundreds of terrorist attacks that claimed the lives of numerous civilians. The terrorist campaign was spearheaded by the Turkestan Islamic Party, a militant organization whose stated goal is to establish an Islamic state in Xinjiang and across the rest of Central Asia. The organization adheres to Salafi ideology and regards Sharia law as the only legitimate system of governance. In response, the Chinese government, while suppressing terrorism, also began addressing what it regarded as its underlying causes. As part of this strategy, vocational education and training centers were established. Their goal was to preventively de-radicalize the Uyghur population through instruction in the Chinese language, basic legal knowledge, and vocational skills, while also addressing poverty and unemployment. Chinese psychiatrists working in de-radicalization centers likely identified symptoms characteristic of mental illness among the Muslims undergoing training there. This interpretation is supported by a Chinese government document titled Vocational Education and Training in Xinjiang, published in 2019. It states in particular, quote, "Through the establishment of education and training centers, Xinjiang carries out the education and rescue of people affected by terrorism and religious extremism. The goal is to prevent the problem at an early stage, treat the disease, and save people." End of quote. The key phrase here is treat the disease and save people. Thus, the Chinese government officially described its policy of de-radicalizing people affected by terrorism and religious extremism in terms of treating a disease. Foreign media distilled this medical rhetoric employed by the Chinese authorities into the following formula: China is treating Islam like a mental illness. The distinction drawn by the Chinese authorities between moderate Muslims and Islamic extremists is also widespread among non-Muslims. They regard Muslims who have partially or completely abandoned Islam as moderate, while labeling those who strictly adhere to its teachings as Islamic extremists. This understanding contradicts Islamic tradition, according to which Islamic extremists who strictly follow the precepts of Islam, participate in jihad, and imitate Muhammad are considered good Muslims. And Muslims who observe Islam only partially or avoid participating in jihad are regarded as hypocrites deserving punishment. In this video, the term Muslims refers to those considered good Muslims according to Islamic tradition. The Chinese authorities' view of Muslims as mentally ill largely aligns with the conclusions reached by some Western experts. For example, Danish psychologist Nikolai Sennels, who worked in a juvenile prison, noted that approximately 70% of juvenile offenders in Denmark are of Muslim origin. This is 15 times higher than their proportion in the population. In 2015, Sennels published an article in which he attributed the development of a mental disorder known as antisocial personality disorder, or sociopathy, among Muslims to Islamic upbringing. In particular, he writes, quote, "Muslims are told that they are superior to non-Muslims, destined to dominate non-Muslims, and that they must distance themselves socially and emotionally from non-Muslims. The many hateful and dehumanizing verses in the Quran and the Hadiths against non-Muslims closely resemble the psychological propaganda that leaders use against their own people in order to prepare them mentally for fighting and killing the enemy. Killing another person is easier if you hate him and do not perceive him as fully human." End of quote. According to Sennels, the Islamic education system, which combines violence with the constant repetition of religious messages, is in many ways reminiscent of the psychological methods used by totalitarian regimes to re-educate political opponents and by the armies of some countries to train ruthless soldiers. Quote, "During numerous sessions with more than 100 Muslim clients, I found that violence and repetition of religious messages are prevalent in Muslim families. The Muslim tradition of using pain and intimidation as part of disciplining children is also widely used in Muslim schools." End of quote. American psychologist Michael Salomon, director of ADC Psychological Services in New York, reaches a similar conclusion. Based on his analysis of the behavior of Middle Eastern terrorist leaders, he concludes that many of them suffer from antisocial personality disorder. Quote, Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, Yahya Sinwar of Hamas, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of Iran are not just political leaders. They are emblematic and embodiments of a distinct mental profile. All three exhibit a specific class of mental disorder characterized by maladaptive patterns of behavior and cognition that deviate from accepted norms. The antisocial personality disorder, perhaps the most destructive of the personality disorders, is characterized by disregard for others' rights, lack of empathy, impetuousness, deceitfulness, manipulativeness, and perhaps most notably the desire to control and undermine others for their own often evil whims. End of quote. Having identified the mental disorder that affects adherents of Islam, let us turn to psychiatry for its definition. According to the American Psychiatric Association, antisocial personality disorder is a pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others, beginning at age 15. In modern psychiatry, the term sociopathy has largely been replaced by the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. However, in this video, we will use the term sociopathy because it is more concise and readily understood by most readers. Now let us examine the main characteristics of this disorder. When listing the signs of sociopathy, it is easy to see that they largely coincide with the image of the typical Muslim immigrant who has become one of the main social problems in countries receiving migrants from Asia and Africa. Sociopathy manifests itself through aggression, violence, and manipulative actions. Sociopaths are prone to committing crimes and using violent methods. They are incapable of experiencing deep feelings and emotional attachment to others. One of the characteristic signs of sociopathy is a deficiency or complete lack of empathy, the ability to understand and share another person's emotional state. Another characteristic sign of sociopathy is aggressiveness, a tendency toward behavior aimed at causing harm to others, or a corresponding emotional state such as anger, rage, malice, or hatred. Sociopathy is widespread among prison populations. Sociopaths are more likely to be convicted of criminal offenses, receive longer prison sentences, and face charges for virtually all types of crime, particularly violent offenses. The above data allow us to conclude that antisocial behavior among Muslims manifests itself in an epidemic of rapes of women and children, daily attacks on random people, including attacks involving weapons, vehicle attacks on crowds during public events, pushing people onto railroad tracks in front of oncoming trains, mass riots accompanied by the looting of stores and the burning of cars, terrorist attacks involving explosive devices, and the disproportionately high proportion of Muslims among those serving prison sentences. According to this analysis, these forms of antisocial behavior are a direct consequence of a mental disorder called active sociopathy. Modern psychiatry classifies people with an active form of sociopathy as posing an increased danger to society. In forensic psychiatry and criminology, sociopathy is considered one of the most significant psychological risk factors for criminal behavior. Why does Islam promote sociopathy? There are many religions in the world. However, their followers do not attack and kill people of other faiths on the same scale, with the same consistency and ferocity as Muslims. The problem likely lies within Islam itself. Indeed, there are three main factors that contribute to the development of sociopathy in a person raised according to Islamic teachings and adhering to the tenets of Islam. First, the need to hate non-Muslims, propagated by the main sources of Islam, the Quran, the Hadith, and the biography of Muhammad. Second, the obligation to participate in jihad, a war for the global domination of Islam. And third, the desire to emulate Muhammad, the founder of Islam, who is regarded in Islamic tradition as the model of the ideal Muslim. Let us consider each of these factors separately. The first factor, the need to hate non-Muslims. Hatred of non-Muslims occupies a central place in the main sources of Islam. This can be explained by the wars Muhammad waged to spread his new religion. Victory in these wars was achieved not only through numerical superiority, but also through the cruelty and ruthlessness. Cruelty is born of hatred, while ruthlessness results from dehumanizing the enemy. Therefore, cultivating these qualities became one of the goals of Islamic teaching. The Quran contains many verses that promote hatred of non-Muslims, dehumanize them, command their killing, and forbid human relations with them. The second factor, the obligation to participate in jihad. Historically, jihad has meant war against non-Muslims. Early Islam spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula solely through warfare. The spread of Islam to neighboring countries likewise occurred through wars of conquest. A detailed definition of jihad is given in the introduction to the section on jihad in the English edition of Sahih al-Bukhari, published by Darus Salam. Quote, "Jihad in Allah's cause is given the utmost importance in Islam and is one of its pillars. By jihad, Islam is established, Allah's word is made superior, and His religion is propagated. By abandoning jihad, Islam is destroyed, and the Muslims fall into an inferior position. Their honor is lost, their lands are stolen, their rule and authority vanish. Jihad is an obligatory duty in Islam on every Muslim, and he who tries to escape from this duty or does not in his innermost heart wish to fulfill this duty dies with one of the qualities of a hypocrite." End of quote. This definition can serve as a commentary on verse, which calls on Muslims to wage jihad until Islam becomes the dominant religion in the world. Quote, "And fight them until there is no more fitna, and the religion will all be for Allah alone." End of quote. To summarize, the Quran commands Muslims to wage jihad against non-Muslims, promises a reward in paradise to those who participate in jihad, and calls those who avoid jihad hypocrites destined for hell. The Hadith further reinforce the Quran's doctrine of jihad. According to the Book of Jihad in Sahih al-Bukhari, jihad is one of the 3 best deeds. A Muslim is obliged to join jihad when called upon. The reward for jihad is unmatched by that of other good deeds, and as a reward, a participant in jihad is guaranteed a place in paradise. And finally, the third factor, the desire to imitate Muhammad. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad is regarded as the model of the ideal Muslim. However, from the perspective of universal morality, he appears immoral and depraved, while under the criminal laws of modern states, including most Muslim ones, he would be regarded as a dangerous criminal. The Hadith and the biography of Muhammad recount that the founder of Islam killed prisoners of war, including children who had begun puberty, killed for insulting or ridiculing people of any gender and age, ordered apostates to be killed, ordered adulterers to be stoned to death, encouraged the rape of captive women in the presence of their husbands, married a 7-year-old girl and had sexual relations with her when she was 9 years old, owned slaves and encouraged slavery, had 11 wives at the same time, tortured people to obtain their property, and extorted money from non-Muslims through a special tax. American researcher Craig Wynn, drawing on Islamic sources in his analysis of Muhammad's personality, summarizes his conclusions in Prophet of Doom, quote, "History has seen many murderers, robbers, and sexual predators. There were even those who claimed to be anointed by God, but there was only one man who made a religion out of it." End of quote. The need to hate non-Muslims, the obligation to participate in jihad, and the desire to emulate Muhammad turn Muslims into cruel and ruthless sociopaths. The extremely high rate of crime among Muslims is in fact a manifestation of jihad, a war to spread Islam. Thus, Muslim immigration represents the importation of foreign soldiers suffering from dangerous mental disorders who, upon arriving in a foreign country, engage in a war of conquest. In this light, the activities of organizations and groups promoting Muslim immigration should be characterized as malicious and criminal. Thanks to Ioan Ratiu's book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, we can identify these organizations and groups. This is the Fabian Society, the initiator of the processes of immigration, multiculturalism, and Islamization. The British Labour Party, led by members of the Fabian Society and engaged in implementing Fabian projects. The Socialist International, founded by the Fabian Society in 1951. Member parties of the Socialist International, implementing Fabian projects in their respective countries. The UN leadership, which has traditionally been dominated by socialists. Liberal International, headquartered in London. A section of the British aristocracy, led by King Charles III, that promotes Islam. The Foreign Office and its intelligence service, M16, which use radical Islam in their hybrid wars. The Anglo-French Rothschild Group and the American Rockefeller Group, who are sponsors of the Fabian Society, World Socialism and Islamization. and media outlets owned by the Anglo-American oligarchy and promoting Fabian projects. The fate of civilizations is determined not by those who come from outside, but by those who open the gates to them. Therefore, the study of Islamic sociopathy cannot be separated from the study of the influential forces that exploit it for their own ends. However, the destructive processes unleashed by these forces are not irreversible. As long as civil society and democratic institutions endure in the countries of European civilization, their peoples retain the ability to change their political course and defend their civilization. A link to the article's source text is provided below this video. Thank you for your attention.